Thank you, Paulina, for a great introduction. I really feel very privileged to be here. It's very touching because Paulina and Marcos have taken the project and put it in such a nice context that Dr. Papadopoulos Ioannis just explained how the SOS for Children, SOS Village, and Help for Children has put our research during economic crisis into a very meaningful context. And I would like to thank you for doing that. And I would also like to thank all of you for coming here and allocating your valuable time. This project actually has been very personally rewarding as well, and Paulina told you how we started this project together. In fact, it goes back about 10 years, in 2001. It has a very personal story, how I started, how I got interested in this research topic. My brother, he is 3 years older than I am. He had started a company in 1999. And it was a small company, and it was providing some prepared food and salads for the hotel industry. And they were doing very well because he was the CEO of Çırağan Palace Hotel for 15 years, so he had a lot of experience and contacts. And then he started his own business with the cook of Çırağan Palace. So everything they were doing was like it should be done. They had a very high quality product. They had a good price. They were delivering on time. They were keeping their promises. Everything was going well until the crisis hit Turkey in 2001. My brother's business had already employed 50 people, and in 2001 it went bankrupt because they could not pay their debt. The large hotels of Istanbul that they were selling to did not pay them within the period they promised, and being a very small firm, they went bankrupt. So, of course, it was a big difficulty for the family. We all had to help them because the kids were in school and everything. And at that point, I started thinking, I was still an associate professor at the time. I said, could I have helped somehow? With my knowledge in marketing, could I have done something? Could I have maybe helped my brother and his family and his companies survive the crisis, which kind of gave rise to this topic of the role of marketing during tough economic times, and especially economic crisis. So the project evolved, of course, and changed many names, and here we are in 2014 in Greece, in beautiful Athens, in a beautiful day, discussing the results from the Turkish sample, and then Marcos is going to talk about the Greek sample. And I think this is a great collaboration of Turkey and Greece. Despite the politicians, I think there are lots of opportunities for collaboration, and we can actually demonstrate that here. So the main focus of my talk is how marketing can play a role in pulling through economic tough times. And of course, the global economy, the 2008, when I started this project, I couldn't even talk about it in top schools in the US because they had this perception that crises are emerging market phenomena, that developed markets, advanced economies, well-established market economies were prone to crisis. However, of course, the Great Recession, which started in 2008, proved otherwise, that the developed advanced economies were not excluded from crisis. They could suffer from it. And in fact, the 2008 crisis affected advanced economies significantly more than emerging markets. So changes in GDP in US, for example, was -3, unemployment was 9%. We saw the same in Europe. Of course, especially Greece was very hardly hit, but Portugal, Spain, and Italy took their shares as well. We saw some of it in Asia. We saw some of it in Russia, of course, got its share, but thanks to oil reserves, they managed to pull through it. And of course, Latin America has also had its share. So this said that what is the difference? Of course, we always faced economic crisis and business cycles. Business cycles are the reality of life, and economic theory differentiates between shocks and business cycles in that the business cycles occur around the long-term trend, whereas a shock is a very low probability but high impact event, and usually the cause or the definition is not well established. But it creates a lot of uncertainty, and this uncertainty is what we're trying to explain in our research. So first of all, consumers, of course, react to crisis by decreasing their confidence in the economy, and they cut their spending. So demand falls faster than supply. The assumptions of consumers as well as managers are broken, are shattered, and a crisis has long-lasting impact. It threatens not only profitability, but the very existence of firms, so the survival of firms. And in such an environment where sales decline and cash flows decline, managerial decisions are more closely scrutinized. However, look at the Chinese. The Chinese use 2 brush strokes to write the word crisis. One brush stroke stands for danger and the other for opportunity. So we want to draw your attention to the opportunity side of a crisis. Some firms see the crisis as a time to challenge the status quo and acquire or steal customers and move ahead. And we in our research, in my research that I'm going to present today, we focus on the role of advertising in helping firms pull through the crisis. Now, advertising is very critical. It is 450 billion worldwide, and it's about 0.6% of global GDP in 2012, and it has risen in 2013. What's the role of advertising? I think you're all familiar with the smile curve of value creation. The smile curve of value creation is a smile curve. It's like a smiling mouth. And it says the value-added activities are the highest in 2 activities. One is R&D, design and commercialization, and the other end is marketing, brand management, and advertising. So the profitable firms of the world, like iPhone, like Apple, like IBM, like the others, invest heavily in both ends. Production, unfortunately, especially standardized production, doesn't generate much value added. So you could move it to China, you could move it to Vietnam, you could move it wherever manufacturing productivity is. Manufacturing costs are low, but R&D and marketing are the 2 high value-added functions of firms. So R&D is value creation, and advertising and creating sales is value appropriation. Firms have to appropriate the value they create. Otherwise, they would never make profit. So you create value with R&D, new product introduction, commercialization, and then you appropriate it, you exploit it by advertising, by brand building, by insulating your brand from competition. So firms, in this function, advertising is very critical. Firms defend and strengthen their position by erecting barriers to imitation through brand-based advertising. Advertising improves competitive position by lengthening own value appropriation opportunities and reducing competitors' value appropriation opportunities. And there's a lot of evidence that shows firms' advertising spending positively impacts its current and future sales and also stock market performance. Now, what we recommend during crisis based on previous research is advertising effectiveness is higher during crisis and downward business cycles compared to normal times. Why? Because normally in tough times, just as consumers cut spending, firms cut spending as well. And the first thing to be cut is advertising. And when everybody cuts advertising, you can stand out with less advertising because competitive clutter is reduced. Firms are able to negotiate more favorable purchase conditions because media prices go down, and there's a lot of high-quality talent that's unemployed in the advertising industry, so you can actually hire and produce high-quality advertising, and therefore quality of ad production goes up. Now, if you look at these two charts, the one on the right shows you how during a recession time, the relationship between ad spending and earnings is not linear. It becomes an U-shaped relationship. Those who increase advertising during tough times actually increase their earnings. Whereas during normal times, the higher the advertising, the higher the earnings. But since everybody is doing it, it's tough to stick out from the crowd. And if you look at the Camber's research, it's from 2002, he took the firms that maintained or increased advertising, the light gray one, and compare them to those who cut advertising, and we see that the effects of cutting advertising during crisis is significant and it's sticky, meaning the effects prevail even in the long run. And this is after controlling for many other things. So what we recommend during crisis is to increase advertising. But what managers actually do is just the opposite. They sharply reduce advertising. The research in 38 countries by Delir Snyder speaks to this. At 1%, when GDP decreases by 1%, the response in advertising is 1.4%, meaning advertising decreases more than GDP. It's more sensitive to decreases in advertising, in GDP. Now, this is the average of 38 countries. Of course, in some countries, like I will show you in Turkey, this is even much more sensitive. So, the research question is, given the positive returns of increasing advertising spending in tough times, why do the majority of firms cut it down? And why do some firms increase their advertising spending in a crisis while the majority cuts down? In fact, we're interested in who are those firms that actually increase advertising and go against the crowd. Who are these courageous firms that can go against the tide and increase their advertising during tough economic times? Now, I have to explain here that already there is evidence that increasing advertising works during crisis, but nobody has looked at who are those firms which increase advertising. So we are trying to look into that. And we suggest that market orientation of the firm. So here, thank you, Professor Avlonitis, for tying to market orientation, because marketing is an outward looking. It looks out of the picture. It looks out of the window of the firm. It looks to competitors. It looks to customers. And its goal is to create more value for customers, to leave something on the table for the customers so that the next time they will prefer your company and not the competition. That's really what marketing is. And in a crisis, that becomes even more critical because value creation is even more critical. So we believe that market orientation is an important driver of this courageous behavior. So market orientation shapes managers' perception of the world, and they view advertising not as an expense, but they view it as an investment. Market orientation makes managers more focused on creating and maintaining value. And these managers, because they are focused on customers and because they understand customers better than their competition, they are less affected by the temporary uncertainty surrounding a crisis. And they view the crisis as an opportunity to alter the pecking order, the leadership and the order in the industry, and therefore they increase advertising when the majority is in fact decreasing it. So the literature and views market orientation as having three components. First, of course, you have to generate information about customers and competitors. Then you have to distribute this information within the firm. And then, of course, the third step, you have to design and implement a response based on the intelligence that you get. And there is a lot of empirical evidence, a lot of data that shows that market orientation is positively related, is important for short-term and long-term firm performance. So we say in a crisis, this previous model that I showed you actually changes in that advertising, market orientation becomes a two-component-based thing, in that intelligence activities lump together and responsiveness lump together. And during a crisis, too much intelligence actually hurts, because the environment is changing so fast, as you have witnessed in Greece since 2009. What you collect today is not true tomorrow, because the environment is changing and data becomes very quickly outdated. And in such an environment, the intelligence activities lose its importance, and in fact, they may lead to decreases in advertising, and I will explain why. However, responsiveness, which is designing a very quick response based on what you already know and sense very quickly, works very well. So we believe that intelligence activities has a negative influence, but responsiveness activities have a positive influence on change in advertising spending, amount firms spend in advertising during an economic contraction. And we control for many variables because, of course, B2B, B2C, firm size. You may say, well, large firms have lots of resources, that's why they can advertise. So we control for that. We can say, well, foreign-owned firms can get cash from abroad, therefore, so we control for foreign ownership. And of course, performance, it is path dependent, and therefore we control for past performance. We also control for many variables, which I will explain shortly, such as advertising is not the only thing they can do. They can change the prices, they can change the wages of their employees, and they can even change the number of people they have. As we saw in Turkey, many companies fired people and laid off people, as we saw in Greece as well. So we look at all the alternative mechanisms that companies can use in coping with a crisis. So I already mentioned what these are. What we do is we combine intelligence generation and intelligence dissemination into intelligence facet. So what we view is that intelligence activities during a crisis becomes a market-driven approach to market orientation, meaning the market drives you. You are reactive to the market. It's a reactive focus to market because you are very much keen in listening the voice of the market, and you take customer and competitor behaviors as given, and this is a more reactive, competitor-driven approach to market orientation. However, responsiveness during the crisis becomes a driving markets approach, in that you are proactively, and again, Professor Avlonitis mentioned how we want this proactive marketing. Marketing is proactive, and we really speak into this in that you are driving, you are shaping the industry yourself. You are not a victim, but you are actually the driver of the industry, in that you are forward-looking, you're already preparing for after the crisis. You want to proactively influence and shape customers and competitors, especially the roles, such as who is the leader, who is the second firm, and you want, as I said, a more proactive approach to market orientation. Now, a firm has and can be and needs to be both driving markets and market-driven. So these are complementary. These are like the two legs of a person. And if both legs are strong, you can run faster. And during normal times, both are equally important. However, what we find in our research is that during crisis, this changes, in that their effects on advertising spending is different. Intelligence, through the mechanism of increased awareness of the crisis and its impact, actually slows the firm in responding to the crisis. This is very counterintuitive, I know, but that's what we find. Because managers become more cautious, more prudent, and cost-cutting is the thing to do, and therefore to avoid costly mistakes they become overcautious. And because they are collecting a lot of data about the terrible situation of the crisis, a wealth of this information quickly becomes obsolete, but during crisis decisions are under the microscope, so they need to disseminate it to more people, and this internal dissemination of information creates this information overload and analysis paralysis situation where it decreases their confidence in their own decision making. And therefore, when own confidence decreases, they rely on the wisdom of the crowds. This is like the information cascade theory, what others do. Marcos was telling me how in a movie, as everybody is leaving, everybody leaves from the same exit. There could be 2, 3 other exits, but we go wherever the crowd is. So we see the same type of behavior during crisis by top-level managers in terms of their marketing, advertising, investment decisions. However, responsiveness, viewing the crisis as an opportunity to pull ahead of competitors, has 2 legs. One is the competitor perspectives. These managers know that contractions change the pecking order and have long-term effects. 70% of firms who gain market share during a contraction preserve their gains during the subsequent boom, and less than 30% who lost market share were able to make it up. From consumer side, consumers become price sensitive and risk averse during a crisis. They demand less, and worst of all, they switch to private labels. They switch to no branded names and lesser brands because they are shaken of their habitual decision making, and therefore it's very important for brand owners, for companies to send reassuring signals not to switch to private labels or lower brands, and therefore you have to build brand equity and insulate brand from price competition, and the major way of doing that during the crisis is advertising. So benefits to advertising, to driving markets via offensive advertising. A very good example in Turkey is Unilever with its Dove brand in 2001. They launched a very offensive ad campaign stressing you don't need an extra moisturizer when you use Dove because Dove has 25% moisturizer. So they eliminated the demand for moisturizer, which is very expensive in a crisis environment. Especially they succeeded in penetrating even low-income segments, the very low, and the very low in Turkey at the time was very, very low compared to Greece. So this is really people who have very little money, and despite the product's high price, which was 4 times a typical soap bar, they gained 5% market share, and they retained that market share after the crisis. So an expensive product, but an added benefit, which is very customer focused, which is saying you don't need to buy moisturizer, just buy Dove, and they gained significant market share. So this is what we mean by proactively changing the status quo in the industry. Of course, every industry is not the same. Some industries are affected much more in a crisis environment, and especially industry turbulence is significant here. When we say industry turbulence, we mean how competition is very intense, whether competitive intensity is high, whether demand, what consumers want, changes quickly from one period to another, and whether the technology we use changes from period to period. So we believe that industry cyclicality makes this negative relation of intelligence on ad spending more negative, and the positive relation of responsiveness on ad spending more positive. Why? I mean, let me briefly say, because you can gain more by being quick in a highly turbulent environment. Now, the way we framed our research was that normally emerging markets grow. I mean, that's why they are emerging, they are growing. So the normal condition for an emerging market like Turkey is the growth. So the crisis condition is like the controlled experimental setting. The natural condition is the growth. So we had to compare our results to a natural condition, and therefore we collected data in 2007 as well, about 2007, and comparing the crisis to the normal condition. So this is what we did. Now, just to give you an idea of the crisis, in 2001, GDP declined by 5.7%, and look at ad spend. Look at sensitivity of ad spending to changes in GDP. It's incredible. It's probably one of the highest in the world. I don't know, I think, Marcos, you're going to talk about the percentage change in Greece. It was drastic, and this was a terrible crisis. I remember we were having dinner with some friends, and we learned at night at 10 o'clock that the Turkish lira was devaluated by 50%. Imagine, if you had debt with dollars, your debt doubled as you were having dinner. I mean, it was incredible. What is it?
Did you? I hope not.
No, I didn't own anything. I had no debt, so I just enjoyed my dinner. Sometimes it's good not to have money. So in 2007, it was just the opposite. The economy grew by 4.7%, and advertising grew by 10.7%. So we used the survey, like in the Greek case, the largest 1,000 manufacturers of Turkey, which represent about 1/3 of GDP produced in 2001 and 2007. Again, we were as blessed as you are, because we had the support of the Istanbul Chamber of Industry. They endorsed the study by encouraging their members to fill the survey, and that's why I got the highest response rate in my academic career. And when I write this in papers, nobody believes it. That's the problem. They say you can't have 43%. Well, I did. I did, because the Istanbul Chamber of Commerce had a special letter in front of the survey saying, please fill this survey just like you did with the donation to SOS Children. In our case, it was the chamber which helped us. And in 2001, we had 412 surveys filled, and in 2007, 302. When things are going better, managers were less interested in our research. But of course, some of the top CEOs and top managers in the largest companies in Turkey, for example, 46% CEOs, this is quite a remarkable sample as well. Now, if you look at industry-based ad spending, inflation adjusted in ad spending, you can see how there's a big difference, but they are all negative. For example, food, beverages, tobacco decreased by 14.5%, machinery, electronics decreased by 14%, non-metallics decreased by 16%. So it was across the board, B2B, B2C. They all decreased advertising, and the average was -11 in the firms in our sample. Of course, this is less than the -38 that I just reported, because these are the largest firms which have some money, and that's what makes the research interesting. It's not because they don't have the resources that they are decreasing. It's for strategic reasons, as we mentioned. That's why it's very important to study the largest firms, because they are the ones who have the resources, and they are not decreasing advertising by default, but they are decreasing it because they are for strategic reasons. So the design necessitated large firms. We controlled for a lot of things, and managerial levers such as prices, etc. And again, this is our model. And this is our main results, in that, as we expected, intelligence facet, the red ones are during the crisis. It decreased ad spending with information overload or paralysis, analysis paralysis, but the responsiveness facet has a significant large coefficient, 0.25, in change in advertising spending. As you see, during the normal time, we do not find these results. And industry turbulence, the slope of the curve on the line on the right is the responsiveness, makes the relationship even stronger in that in high industry turbulence, the responsiveness effect on ad spending is even more pronounced. The intelligence activities are not any different in highly turbulent or low turbulent. Here are our coefficients. I already showed these to you. Now, to give a complete picture, we also looked at some other relationships. For example, in the upper right hand, you see that change in prices doesn't have an effect. Usually managers think pricing is a big thing, not in a crisis, not in the sample of the firms we have, but change in wages does have an impact in the green part during expansion year, but most importantly, change in number of employees had a very large positive effect. So our interpretation is that in addition to playing with advertising, some companies, instead of laying off people, they kept people, and maybe they gave them additional roles, and they tried to use the people they have. For example, I remember very well, firms said to their employees, look, I'm either going to lay you off, or are you happy with a 50% decline in your salary? And most people said, okay. And in fact, because the firm was committed to them, they became more committed to the firm. And after the crisis, when things started getting better, this commitment to the firm was even higher in those firms who said, I know managers who said, look, I'm not spending myself not to fire people. So it was a very personal relationship, and these employees sensed that, and they worked much, much harder to keep their jobs because they knew their jobs were in danger. So we see this there. Now look at change in ad spending on performance. It's 1.46, so it's significant and positive during the crisis, but the effect is not like that during normal time. So during normal time, to make the same effect, you have to be P&G, Unilever, Coca-Cola, and have unlimited budgets to really stake out of the crowd. But the crisis could be an opportunity to view advertising as an investment and not as an expense. Now, responsiveness has a positive relation through market orientation, which increases ad spending, but it also has a direct relationship to performance. It's 1.15, and its relationship during normal time is also positive, the green 0.200. So responsiveness is always important in being market-oriented, having the responsiveness dimension, nurturing this type of behavior is very critical. So crises present opportunities for firms to pull ahead of competition. Ours is the first study to link market orientation to ad spending, using the economic collapse in Turkey in 2001 as the empirical setting. We provide a nuanced understanding of the relationship between market orientation and advertising, which is a very important implementation level marketing variable. And I already said this, so I will not repeat it, but there is some support from the industry for us. This is Joseph Tripoli, Chief Marketing Commercial Manager and Coca-Cola in 2009. He said, don't let the urgent overwhelm the important. It's very easy now to panic, and we cannot panic. Invest in your brands now, especially in these dry times. The easiest thing to do is to shut down, and that's the worst thing. So he speaks to our findings as well. So what do we do? Of course, I am called the crisis lady. I think I need to deserve this name. So I'm looking for any country which is facing a crisis. But the joke aside, I decided to carry on with this research. In 2011, we collected data when the Turkish economy did great, it grew 8.5%. So now we can look at the crisis, moderate growth, which is 2007, and fast growth environments. And of course, we are all here to hear the results in Greece, which is unfortunately something in Turkey was unique in 2001 in that we recovered in 2002. So in 2001, it was a 5.7% shrinkage in GDP. In 2002, it was about 6% growth. So it was very quick recovery the year after. But the case in Greece is more unique and unfortunately more prolonged. So Greece gives us an opportunity, but also a way to learn from your experiences, which are very unique in that it's a deep, prolonged contraction. So what is the role of marketing in such an environment? And we collected data in 2013. I have here 2012, but as you know, in research, everything goes slow. But with your help, we have 227 responses. And of course, as the Turks, we always hope the evil eye will do its job and protect Turkey and Greece from other economic crises. Thank you.